to have with us Ruth Rosengarten, putting out this stunning exhibition called Dear Fusia. She's corrected my pronunciation. And I'm equally delighted to have here Terry Kurgan to introduce it. Terry Kurgan is also, like Ruth, both of them work very strongly with issues around photography and family photographs and memory, and it's a wonderful pairing, I think, both between the artist who's exhibiting and the person who's going to introduce it. So thank you. And Terry Kurgan.
It's a great pleasure and a privilege to open Ruth's exhibition. And to begin on a personal note, I have to mention with gratitude, Ruth, our many long years of friendship and intellectual exchange, and which began when I met you in 1995. Ruth was in Cape Town. Ruth's an artist and a writer. She still is an artist and a writer, living in Lisbon at the time, and visiting South African artists in their studios, creating work for
Don't mess with Mr. In Between,
which was a seminal exhibition at a very different time and a much more hopeful and optimistic moment in our not so new democracy. Well, then it was only 2 years after the dissolution of apartheid in South Africa. And Ruth's exhibition brought together the work of 15 South African artists. The fabulous title of the exhibition, as I remembered, was borrowed not so much from the Johnny Mercer song as from Homi Bhabha. Homi Bhabha's appropriation of it in a bid to shed the binary terms that had marked South African culture under apartheid. I was one of the artists that Ruth selected for that show, and from that time onwards, in spite of always living in different countries, we've maintained a close friendship, collaborated on several projects, books, exhibitions, and always kept up a very rich exchange of thoughts and ideas with regard to our many shared interests in our reading and in our work, which is often about what Ruth has taught me to call the evocative power of photographs as objects. Dear Fusia grows out of Ruth's multimedia visual arts practice, which in recent years has comprised largely of photography and drawing, with a deep interest, and these are in her own words now, in photographs that straddle, or apparently straddle, the awkward turf between professional and amateur, between the public and the private, between travel photography, which is often an exploration of the extraordinary, and the documentation of everyday life. You did. It's on your website. Ruth writes, I'm constantly moved by the ephemeral, flat magic of the ordinary. Now, Ruth is a wonderful writer and usually exquisitely articulate about her own work, with hindsight, but exquisitely articulate about everything. But on a page in the About section on her website, which she tantalizingly calls Considerations, she writes, I don't see myself as a photographer, but as someone who uses photography in her practice. There are many brilliant professional photographers whose work is monumental. I mean that each photograph is a kind of monument. But there are others whose work I've gradually discovered as mine has nuzzled theirs, whose photographs seem to be closer to snapshots and yet are not snapshots, photographs that are about nothing in particular, whose appeal is more difficult to describe but has something to do with the beauty of the uneventful and the non-spectacular. Many of my photos have to do with traces, the vestiges of something having happened or someone having been there. The Mexican artist Gabriel Orozco had something to say about his photographs lying between the relic and the document, and it is at this juncture that I would situate what I do, even when I'm drawing. And I thought that also was a very fitting articulation of this body of work here. Many of Ruth's projects attempt to get through the opaque two-dimensional surface of the found photograph, exploring the meanings that are produced beyond the moment of looking at them. And in the words of a visual theorist and writer about photography that we've both been reading, called Margaret Arlen, in her recent publication, Touching Photographs. When the photograph has been put away, the newspaper recycled, and the book closed. While I know that Ruth accepts the widespread theory that acknowledges some relationship between a photograph and its referent, I suspect that she's less interested in representation and more interested in how photographs act in the world, what photographs do in the world. While she presents the photograph as a material object, she simultaneously explores its ephemeral nature and the tensions of time, space, and memory that it embodies. And these are her words: in superimposing the ghostly front side, the en face, I can't pronounce it the way you do, the en face image over its manifest verso content, she creates a new object through which she attempts to acquaint both herself and the viewer with the intimacy of the private archive and its potential narratives. And looking, Ruth, at the beautiful, haunting works of dear Fusia, the ephemeral scraps that you've transformed into quite solid new photographic works, makes me think about how an engagement with photographs shapes human relationships and allows the real to become accessible and more touchable. For many years now, Ruth has been preoccupied with the survival of objects and the life of things. This project, too, originates in objects, the box of photographs that were inscribed on the back that she found when cleaning out her late mother's bedroom, highlighting perhaps their significance as markers of the whole, torn in everyday life, as they simultaneously mark some of the great historic upheavals of the previous century and one person, Ruth's mother's, geographic dislocation and exile. Ruth describes herself as someone who's working with post-memory. And the person who invented that term, Marianne Hirsch, in her book Family Frames, has expanded upon this notion in several subsequent publications. And it's useful to explain Ruth's relationship to this material, to describe Ruth's relationship to this material. Hirsch coined the term to capture memory as it manifests itself in the transgenerational reverberation of an event. In material terms, post-memory is embodied as the after-image that certain photographs provoke, photographs that seem to hover between an individual's memory and impersonal history. It is possible that one might not have lived through such events oneself, but an image of them pervades the culture one inhabits. For Marianne Hirsch, collective experiences may be distilled in torn or faded individual photographs of someone or something lost, though unknown. Exposure to such photographic images intertwines with the stories of those who did live through the events, together penetrating by various cultural means into the very fabric of the self. In Ruth's work, the photograph's apparent immunity to time is seen as a call for a future response, a response that is prompted by the ghostly afterlife of every photograph subject. Dear Fusia is a moving body of work that makes us aware of the viewer's responsibility to account for the spectral evidence embedded, in Ruth's case, on both sides of every image.